I'm Brandi. Kruse. Coming up today on Undivided, we'll have a special commercial-free episode as we discuss, of course, the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. We will dive into some of the useless platitudes that have been offered up as a way to prevent political violence, and we will have an interview for you from the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. All of that and more coming up. Remember, you can support Undivided for just $5 a month by signing up at undividedpod.com. Hello and welcome to Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. Appreciate every single one of you. We're going to have a special episode today. We will not have any commercials during the show today. We're also going to do away with some of our regular segments. Obviously, this is the first time we've talked to you guys and had a show since the attempted assassination on former President Donald Trump. You know, we had been, we didn't even have a Thursday show last week. We'd been out on the islands for a wedding. We get back. I decided to take a nap. Maybe 10 minutes into my nap, my husband wakes me up out of bed and he says they just tried to kill Donald Trump. And I just turned on the TV and I'm sure the same went for you. I mean, it's an emotional experience whenever you realize that you're watching history unfold and whenever you're witnessing something that you know is going to have such a profound impact on the country, certainly on the upcoming election, and just on, I think, our hope and belief, I guess it has been for me, that the country is going to eventually find a way to turn things around, and then something like that happens and you're left wondering when, how, what will it take? I'm sure every single one of you have seen it by now, but let's just reset things with the moment in Butler, Pennsylvania, where shots began.
If you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
And of course, the four pumps of his fist, the fight, 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 the cheers from the crowd, the accompanying images that have been burned into all of our minds. I mean, incredibly powerful. And politics aside, regardless of how you feel about Donald Trump, I mean, to see him in that moment, I don't know how I'd react to being shot at. I don't know how I'd react to being shot. I can tell you, though, I probably wouldn't get back up immediately and pump my fists in the air and say, fight, 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 and make sure I signaled to the world that I was okay and that everything was going to be okay. That showed in that moment, at least to me, what a remarkable leader that President Trump was, to recognize in the moment the importance of doing that. Look, let me just start with a couple thoughts here. Lord knows I've had an adventure with my support for Donald Trump over the years. I went from, for the better part of 6 years, railing against him as a person and as a politician. I was very hard on him in the media. I'm not going to apologize for that. I think that it's the job of every member of the media to be fair, yet critical of people who are in power. But I'll say I took that to borderline moments of TDS. You guys will know that on this show last week, however, I have really taken a complete 180 on the former president. I said on the show last week that if it is Donald Trump and Joe Biden on the ticket in November, I will cast my ballot for the very first time for former President Donald Trump. Well, after this, I will tell you, I would walk 1,000 miles barefoot through broken glass to cast my ballot for former President Donald Trump and to make sure that every American who wants to do so can do so as well. And I don't have to rehash the trajectory that I have taken on him, but I think I've started over the years to see a little more independently what's been happening. And here you have a guy who has all the money in the world, who doesn't have to do this, who has been prosecuted, who's been vilified, who has now been shot and shot at, and who still wants to do it. And I'm left wondering, well, why? Some people will say on the other side, it's narcissism. He wants power. It's like he had power. He had power. He had all the money in the world. I don't see any reason in the world why, after all of this, Donald Trump would continue to seek the office of presidency if it wasn't for that he wanted to help the country and believed he's in a position to help the country. And so certainly after this weekend, that's where I'm at. This has ignited this conversation, of course, around the tone and tenor of our political discourse in the United States of America. It's a conversation we've been having on the show on a regular basis. This obviously brings it to a new level. President Biden came out. He had a couple remarks. In a couple hours after the shooting, he came out, gave some very quick remarks. And then he gave something a little more lengthy. And then he had a pre-taped address last night from the Oval Office. And he talked about, asking for investigations to figure out what went wrong with the Secret Service protection of the former president on the campaign trail. But then he talked a lot about lowering the temperature. His speech was about 6 minutes and 30 seconds. What we've done is we've pulled out and created a montage of all of his remarks about trying to bring the political temperature down in the United States. Here it is.
My fellow Americans, I want to speak to you tonight about the need for us to lower the temperature in our politics. And to remember, while we may disagree, we are not enemies. Yesterday's shooting at Donald Trump's rally in Pennsylvania calls on all of us to take a step back. Take stock of where we are, how we go forward from here. Violence has never been the answer. There is no place in America for this kind of violence, or for any violence ever. Period. No exceptions. We can't allow this violence to be normalized. The political record in this country has gotten very heated. It's time to cool it down. We all have a responsibility to do that. But politics must never be a literal battlefield, and God forbid, a killing field. This places an added burden on each of us to ensure that no matter how strong our convictions, we must never descend into violence. But in America, we resolve our differences at the battle box. That's how we do it, at the battle box, not with bullets. The power to change America should always rest in the hands of the people, not in the hands of a would-be assassin. Let's remember, here in America, while unity is the most elusive of all goals right now, nothing is more important for us now. In American democracy, where the rule of law is respected, in American democracy, where decency, dignity, fair play aren't just quaint notions, but living, breathing realities. Let's remember we are the United States of America. There is nothing beyond our capacity when we do it together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops.
Now, I was glad that Biden said something, even if it was pre-recorded from the Oval Office. I'm glad he talked about lowering the temperature in the United States and in politics, but there's one key thing he missed. There's one thing he did not say, and did not say clearly, that he should have said as he is sitting there for 6.5 minutes, urging the rest of us, all of us collectively, I suppose, to lower the temperature. He did not take any accountability himself for not lowering the temperature in this country. In fact, just last week, here is President Joe Biden on the campaign trail in Detroit.
Most importantly, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, Trump is a threat to this nation.
That is a very different tone than the one that he took in the Oval Office. And it should not have taken an assassination attempt for the President of the United States to be a leader in encouraging better political discourse in this country. This is a man who repeatedly over the last several years has called Donald Trump a threat to the very fabric of our country, a threat to everything we hold dear, a threat to our democracy. And when you have those words that fall on the ears of someone who is already unwell, unhinged, as anyone who tries to assassinate a president must be, then you have a recipe for disaster. Remember what Joe Biden ran on? Joe Biden ran on these promises of being someone who would bring the country together, a president for everyone, and then he immediately devolved into suggesting that his political rival would unravel the fabric of our country and everything we hold dear as Americans. And then he has the audacity after an assassination attempt to kind of preach to us about our political discourse as a country. That could have been a home run for the President of the United States in that moment to say, and me too. And me too. I have said things that I now regret. and I'm going to have a different tone and tenure moving forward. Instead, he doesn't even acknowledge the tone that he had just days ago. And I'm not going to sit here and draw a straight line from things the President of the United States has said about Donald Trump and say that's the reason why a 20-year-old picked up a rifle and tried to shoot Donald Trump, did successfully shoot him. I'm not going to do that because I don't know enough about what was going on in the mind of this 20-year-old. What I do know, though, is what the president has said about Donald Trump has not helped. It has not helped to cool the temperature in this country. And certainly President Joe Biden isn't alone in that. You know, I want to say something, and I was struggling with how I want to put this today because I certainly don't want it to come across as a call, obviously a call for violence, or you never know what YouTube is going to flag or whatever it is. But let me just say something about the Hitler comparisons. So there have been, the Washington Post, some people have brought back up that it's not just calling Trump a threat to democracy. People have repeatedly, and in the media, compared him to Hitler, to Adolf Hitler, in no uncertain terms. I mean, even putting his face next to Hitler's, giving him a Hitler mustache. The strong imagery. Daily Wire put together this montage. I'll just play a little bit of it for you. I don't need to go to the ends of the earth to play every single example where the media has compared Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler, but here's a few.
Let's deal with Hitler, okay?
I don't think it's hyperbolic to say that. I mean, that is Mussolini, Hitler-like language.
Trump's affinity for Hitler was always covered under an umbrella of his stupidity.
Echoing Hitler's words.
Listen to this.
Well, Hitler was duly elected.
That's right.
Echoing the hateful rhetoric of Adolf Hitler.
It echoes Hitler.
That's the kind of language Hitler used in Mein Kampf.
About vermin and Hitler and Mussolini.
That's a horrifying clip. That's a fascist clip.
Just going full on Hitler.
From Hitler's Germany.
We just need to say, for the record, that the term vermin was really effectively used by Adolf Hitler.
So when you compare anyone, but certainly the former president of the United States, the front runner, and not just amongst on the Republican side, but the front runner to be the next president of the United States. When you compare him to Hitler, in my opinion, which is what the show is about, you are just asking for someone to try to kill him. Now, think about this for a second. Think about this. Any of us, if given the opportunity to go back in time and be able to kill Adolf Hitler, would any of us refuse? He killed millions of people. He was responsible for the deaths of millions of people. Any of us, if you could go back in time and you could be the one to kill Adolf Hitler before he was able to unleash such horror on the world and on human beings, would you not do it? I would. And I think that that's probably a pretty mainstream opinion. I don't know that there's a single person watching this who, if I said, would you have killed Adolf Hitler so he couldn't kill millions of people, you would probably say yes, right? So when you compare Donald Trump to someone like Adolf Hitler, and again, you have to always keep in mind how your words will be received by someone who is mentally unstable. There's not a single one of us who wouldn't have said, yes, I'd kill Adolf Hitler. So now you compare Donald Trump over and over and over and over and over and over and over again to Adolf Hitler, someone who killed millions and millions of people. And you don't think that there are some people who are going to say, well, if he's like Adolf Hitler, then I am doing a service to the country and to the world by taking him out. That's not a big leap to make. Now, let me also say, that doesn't mean that Donald Trump is above criticism. Anyone who's running for public office, anyone who's running to be the president of the free world and of the United States is certainly has within every fair right to be criticized by the media, to be criticized by their rivals and by their political opponents. I'm not saying Donald Trump has never said something that's wrong. Of course he has. And I'm not saying that the right and that Donald Trump don't have a responsibility in the state of our political discourse in this country. Of course he does. It's one of the fundamental reasons why I didn't support Donald Trump for all of those years. I didn't like the things that he said. I didn't like the way that he said them. I didn't like the personal attacks. He's the king of personal attacks. He's also been subjected to an awful lot of personal attacks by a side of the political aisle that always claims to have the moral high ground. So here you have this side where you want to paint Donald Trump as someone who's this threat to democracy. He's worse than Hitler. He's like going to ruin our country and the fabric of our country. But then at the same time, you're just as vitriolic as he has been. You want to act like you have the moral high ground. You don't. I said on the show last week, both political parties are morally bankrupt to the core. And it actually bothers me more that you have one side that acts like it has the moral high ground, yet engages in behavior like this. And then again, the president of the United States, Joe Biden, has the audacity to sit there for 6.5 minutes and preach to us about how we need to lower the political temperature in this country. They're all morally bankrupt. They've all contributed to the political temperature in this country. And then I look at some of the local reactions to this. This is predominantly a show about Washington state politics. And so there's certainly not a lot I can tell you about what happened with Donald Trump this weekend that you haven't already seen on CNN, MSNBC, or Fox. But when it comes to, local politics, Governor Jay Inslee on his official Twitter account, he tweeted out, didn't even use Donald Trump's name, by the way, which I think is interesting. Violence has no place in politics ever. I hope whoever perpetrated today's attack is held to account. Our thoughts are with all who attended the former president's event, and I join many others who are expressing gratitude for the Secret Service and first responders. Violence has no place in politics ever. This is a guy who, 2.5 days after CHOP, one of the worst instances of political violence that we've experienced in the state of Washington since he has been in office, who claimed hadn't even heard about it when he acknowledged later on that he had. Yet now he said violence has no place in politics. Platitudes. They all put out the exact same platitudes. Political violence has no place in politics. Yet there are countless examples of people who I'm going to discuss coming up who have ignored acts of political violence in their own backyard perpetrated by their side of the political aisle, and who now want to offer up these platitudes because they feel like it's what they need to do. It's what they need to say. Oh, well, the former president, who I've said horrible things about over and over and over and over and over again, somebody tried to put a bullet in his brain, so now I guess I have to put out a platitude saying there's no place for political violence in this country, and you expect us to believe that that's sincere. I was looking back, one of the first things that came to mind after Jay Inslee put out that tweet saying violence has no place in politics is the extent to which he has vilified not only Donald Trump, but Trump supporters. I was thinking back in 2021 when he called Trump supporters bioreactor facilities and basically said, for no reason, by the way, there was no reason in this press conference to specifically call out supporters of Donald Trump. It had nothing to do with the press conference whatsoever. To specifically name and shame Donald Trump supporters as being people who would be responsible for killing others in the community if they weren't vaccinated. Here's the clip.
You are a bioreactor facility generating virus and spreading it around, including to kids who can't get vaccinated. I want to reiterate that. If you're a 50-year-old man who, voted for Donald Trump and didn't think COVID was a problem and you don't get vaccinated right now, you arrest every kid in your city.
So you have Jay Inslee again. Platitude, useless platitude about Donald Trump. After years and years and years of not only vilifying Donald Trump, but vilifying Donald Trump supporters for no other reason than he just didn't like Donald Trump. Totally forgetting, apparently, that he's a governor for them, too. Accusing them of being a threat to all the kids in their community if they didn't get vaccinated. Accusing them of being bioreactor facilities. And now he wants to offer up his useless platitude. Get real. Same with Bob Ferguson. What is the key thing that Bob Ferguson has been campaigning on? The key platform as he runs for governor? That his opponent, Dave Reichert, is a MAGA extremist and that he's stood up to Donald Trump, right? Well, of course, he had to get his useless platitude out there. So he did. He tweeted out on Saturday, I condemn this act of violence against former President Donald Trump in the strongest possible terms. As a nation, we must come together. Yet just on June 29th, what did he tweet? Donald Trump is an existential threat to our democracy, our American values, and reproductive freedom. I have experienced taking him on and stopping his illegal, cruel, and un-American policies. So June 29th, he's calling Donald Trump un-American, cruel, saying he is an existential threat to our democracy, our values, reproductive freedom, and that he has experienced taking him on. And now, because somebody tried to shoot Donald Trump in the brain, he says, I condemn this in the strongest possible terms. And just like Joe Biden, taking absolutely no responsibility for what he said just days ago. But again, when we talked about the Hitler comparisons and stuff like that, but even stopping short of Hitler comparisons, when you tell an American that someone is a threat to the very fabric of our country and our way of life, you don't understand what you're putting in their head. And then again, it's not just about Bob Ferguson's relentless attacks on Donald Trump, not on his policies, but on him as a person, as a person. He's then using that as a tool to attack Dave Reichert, even putting out ads where he photoshops a Make America Great Again hat on Dave Reichert. He knows exactly what he's doing. Dave Reichert will promote and facilitate the Trump agenda. And remember, he's already told us what the Trump agenda is. He's already said that Donald Trump is an existential threat to our democracy, our American way of life. And so now what he's doing is saying that Dave Reichert is too. I'm going to put a Make America Great Again hat on his head. All the things I've said about how dangerous Donald Trump is, now all of that applies to Dave Reichert because I've photoshopped a MAGA hat on his head. Do you think that Bob Ferguson will change his tactics in the race for governor? Because remember what he said on Saturday, as a nation, we must come together. He's putting his platitudes out there. How long will those platitudes last? Because the stream of attack against his opponent, Dave Reichert, has been almost singularly about the dangers of Donald Trump. And again, it's a political campaign. You're free to talk about specific policies that Donald Trump supports, that you think are bad for the country, or that Dave Reichert supports that you think are bad for the country, but you cross a line when you say he's an existential threat to everything we hold dear. So the real proof in seeing if these go above and beyond worthless, meaningless platitudes is how they run their campaigns moving forward. How is Bob Ferguson going to run his campaign? How is Joe Biden going to run his campaign? I had someone in the comments a couple minutes ago say, do you take responsibility, Brandi, for your TDS? And I don't think you could find a single clip of me ever suggesting that Donald Trump or Donald Trump winning would take away everything Americans hold dear, or would be a fundamental threat to our democracy and our way of life. What you will hear me saying over and over the years is that I don't like the way he speaks to people. I didn't like the way he talked about John McCain. I still don't particularly like the way he speaks to people. But I have come around into the realization that a lot of what I was feeling toward Donald Trump was because of the way the media covered Donald Trump. And that the left was just as bad. And the media didn't point that out as much. So my TDS was based on what I was seeing and hearing in this weird media bubble and ecosystem. But if you find something that you think is in line with the way that Bob Ferguson has talked about Donald Trump, or Jay Inslee has talked about Donald Trump, or Joe Biden has talked about Donald Trump, that I've said, bring it to my attention. But I don't think there's anything that I have said that would plant a seed in the head of a mentally unhinged person to say, well, I've got to kill Donald Trump because he's a threat to our very way of life, and I'm saving people, potentially millions of lives, because he's a second coming of Adolf Hitler. But I feel like I have been very transparent, reflective, and self-aware, and honest with all of you about how I have come to a much different place on Donald Trump. So I don't know that that's a very fair comment. But again, if you see something, bring it to my attention. So what I thought over the weekend was the very best thing that I saw said about any of this and the state of the country and what happened over the weekend came from the former First Lady, Melania Trump. I said on Twitter, she doesn't speak often, but I feel like when she says something, it's very meaningful. So she put out a long statement after her husband survived that assassination attempt. And it was really striking to me what she was clearly trying to do, and that is to remind people of one very simple thing, that Donald Trump is a human being, that he's a person, that he's not just a former president or a political candidate, that he is her husband, he is a father, and that he means something to them as a human being. I'll just read just a paragraph of this for you. A monster who recognized my husband as an inhuman political machine attempted to wring out Donald's passion, his laughter, ingenuity, love of music, and inspiration. The core facets of my husband's life, his human side, were buried below the political machine. Donald, the generous and caring man who I have been with through the best of times and the worst of times. I don't know that I've ever really heard Donald Trump kind of characterized in that way by anyone, frankly. In that very personal way. Someone who's got this genius about him, someone who loves music, talking about his laughter and his human side and his generosity. And it's very smart what she's trying to do. She's trying to remind Americans that behind every political candidate, there is a person. And if we can't see the humanity in someone, that's where we're going wrong as a country. And really, it's not that hard to do. It's not that hard to recognize that you can have a political disagreement with someone, and you can also understand that they're a human being, and you can separate the two things. I did it just on the show last week. We had a segment where I was going after Bob Ferguson, and this is how I started that segment. You know, I want to make something clear before I dive into this segment. I don't hate Bob Ferguson. I'm sure he's a wonderful person. I mean, I've met him several times. I've had an opportunity in my previous career as a journalist to interview him several times. He was perfectly pleasant. I'm sure he's a wonderful husband and a great father, and I wish no ill will upon him. And I think sometimes in politics these days, it can be hard to, the line between disliking someone as a person and disliking someone as a politician or as a political candidate gets blurred a little bit. I think there's a lot of hate and anger in politics, and I never want to come across like I hate the man. I don't hate the man. But he scares the hell out of me when it comes to the prospect of him being the next governor of Washington State. That was just last week. Is that so hard? We have done that numerous times with politicians I don't agree with, to make sure to state, hey, he's also a dad. He's a father. I'm sure he's perfectly fine. Every interaction we've had, he's been perfectly nice to me. However, I disagree with his politics, and here's why. It's really, really, really not that hard to do. Yet I think political candidates have stopped doing that. The media has stopped doing that in their criticisms, the opinion media, obviously, in particular. So that brings us forward to today and the Republican National Convention. We'll have some breaking news that we'll get in here just momentarily. But what does the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, what does it change, if anything? It seems like his near miss with death has changed some things for Donald Trump. He gave an interview, his first interview that he did since he was shot. And he says that he's decided to change his entire speech that he's going to give later this week at the RNC. He said, I had all prepared an extremely tough speech, really good, all about the corrupt, horrible administration. And then he's added, but I threw it away. He said a new speech was in the works because, quote, I want to try to unite our country. He said, I don't know if that's possible. People are very divided. He said on policy differences, some people want open borders, some don't. Some want men to be able to play on women's sports teams, others don't. So there's a lot to get through. Still, he said he remains convinced that success will unite the country, though he didn't otherwise define what that success would entail, according to his first interview afterwards. So he says, I'm throwing out my speech. I'm going to focus on uniting the country. In fact, one of the very first things that happened, the RNC came out and said that Nikki Haley had been given an invite to come speak at the RNC. I did not see that one coming. She and Trump obviously had a very tense primary process. Some of Trump's supporters are very anti-Nikki Haley, but clearly Donald Trump wanted to move forward on a more united path. And part of that is giving a united speech and also saying people who have opposed me within the party are welcome. The RNC would not have invited Nikki Haley had Donald Trump not told them to invite Nikki Haley, had Donald Trump not approved them inviting Nikki Haley. And so that brings us to the convention this week. In breaking news, former President Donald Trump has picked J.D. Vance to be his vice presidential running mate. Of course, J.D. Vance serves as a junior senator from Ohio since 2003, so he's fairly new to Congress. He did, however, rise to fame. You might recall, I think it was 2016. There was a memoir he wrote called Hillbilly Elegy. There was later a show about it, about his upbringing, and he has a really interesting backstory. I don't know that he would have been my pick. I'm very curious to kind of hear everybody's reactions to that. I had asked you guys in our daily subscriber show poll, which is apparently now a moot point, whether you thought because they had invited Nikki Haley that Nikki Haley would be the VP pick. I thought that that was a strong possibility and would be a really good idea to bring the party together. But then there were some folks online saying that Donald Trump needs to pick someone who would, make him less likely to be assassinated, meaning, if there are powers that be out there who want to see him gone because of his politics, they'd be less likely to do that if the next person, the VP, is very similar to him politically, as they would if they've got like more of a moderate Republican or something like that. I know all that's just sort of like conjecture and maybe conspiracy or maybe not. But J.D. Vance is just an interesting pick to me. I'm not sure. He doesn't really have that much name recognition. Again, he's fairly new. I don't know who he brings into the fold that previously wouldn't be in the fold, but does it matter? I don't know that it matters. I do not know that it matters at this point who Donald Trump's VP is, because between Joe Biden's age and the assassination attempt, I think even Democrats are starting to realize that Donald Trump is going to be the next president, the 47th president of the United States. So maybe it really didn't matter to bring a VP into the fold who added something else to the ticket. So I'm sure we're going to hear much more about that. However, this morning, we did speak to the chair of the Washington State Republican Party, Jim Walsh, who, it was really funny. We were scheduled to tape an interview with him, and he was like on a bus trying to get to the convention with all these convention goers. And so we ended up talking to him, taping this interview about an hour ago in a parking lot somewhere. And Nicole, I think we do talk about the VP pick. So I'll just note that when we taped this, we hadn't heard the VP pick yet. And so we didn't have time to remove that from the conversation. But Jim Walsh was nice enough to join us on the show from the RNC to talk about what's going on there this week. And also, of course, to react to the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Jim Walsh, we appreciate you taking the time. Just a little housekeeping thing before we talk about, what happened over the weekend. We're expecting a VP choice to be announced today. Do you know when that's coming?
Everybody's waiting to hear that announcement. The rumor here is that Trump is going to show up on the stage today and announce the vice president ahead of his normal acceptance speech in a few days. There's all kinds of speculation on who the person's going to be. As I've always said about Trump, don't try to guess what he's doing. He loves to distract with trial balloons over here while he's working over there. So I don't know who it'll be. I'm sure it'll be a calculation for someone who will bring some electoral votes to him. But so much has changed lately. I mean, after Saturday, the dynamics seem to be changing by the minute, much more in his favor. So I don't know if that's going to affect his choice. Lately, a lot of people have been talking about the Virginia governor, Glenn Youngkin, who is term limited out of his position as governor in Virginia. And then, of course, Nikki Haley was just added to the speaker list about a day and a half ago, which increased speculation that there may be some rapprochement between Haley and Trump, that maybe it's Nikki Haley. But I just think it's, he's a showman. He'll hang on to that announcement to the last minute. And I don't think he would mind surprising everybody with the pick.
Yeah. So obviously, let's talk about Saturday. I was taking a nap when it happened. My husband woke me up and he said, Brandi, they just shot Trump. And we turned on the TV and I was just in tears because it's just that moment in history where you recognize the gravity of it. Can you talk us through kind of what you went through in those minutes and hours after?
I dread it, Brandi. I dread it. I've always been concerned that the personal vitriol directed at Trump was going to end up not with a true activist doing something like this, but with an unstable person who was swayed by the rhetoric, who might believe that Trump was actually an existential threat to democracy, and to a vulnerable person, to an unstable person, they might believe they're doing the world a favor by eliminating an existential risk to our democracy. And so that rhetoric that we've heard not just from Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden, but also from Bob Ferguson and Jay Inslee. I mean, I think the danger in it is not that the politicos would do anything. It's that someone who isn't that political, but is vulnerable, is unstable, might use it as the triggering event. There are some parallels between what happened to Trump and the assassination attempt this past weekend and the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan 40 years ago, when it was an unstable individual who'd been motivated in that case by movies. He thought he was in love with Jodie Foster, the movie actress, and was going to kill Reagan to impress Jodie Foster. It could be something like that, where a fragile, unstable person is motivated by all this talk of fascist and dictator and existential risk. So I'm glad to see that the Biden campaign has taken some of their ads down since Saturday, but certainly Bob Ferguson's use of exactly that rhetoric is going to be an issue, I think, for Bob Ferguson, because that is dangerous, irresponsible, and damaging stuff.
Well, and we had just talked about this on the show. He said June 29th, Donald Trump is an existential threat to our democracy, our American values, et cetera, et cetera. That from Bob Ferguson. Then he turns around and says, I condemn this act of violence, almost this generic platitude we saw from a lot of Democrats. What would it take from Bob Ferguson for you to truly believe that he understands or acknowledges in some way that language he's used in the past is dangerous?
I hope it does, but I'm not optimistic. We'll have to see. I mean, his initial responses, Ferguson's, to the Trump shooting were very kind of self-centered. He talked about himself and his family, which is understandable. He talked about threats he gets, but we all get threats. I've gotten threats. Brandi, I know you've gotten threats. It was interesting to me that the first place that Ferguson went when asked about the Trump assassination attempt was to himself. That seemed a little odd. We all take risks when we get into either the political arena or into media or into the public eye. And we should take that as a reality we're aware of, but we try not to obsess about it. And clearly the first place Ferguson goes is to himself. And I don't know. I don't think that's going to serve him well. I'm sure they're going to come up with better talking points for him now, and they need to.
Yeah. So we're going to hear from, maybe briefly today, but formally later this week, former President Donald Trump. What kind of speech do you think he needs to deliver in light of what's happened?
We need to focus on what's good. We need to focus on policy. Brandi, I don't like rhetoric of personalities, speeches that are personally focused. I think we need to talk about good policy. At the federal level, that's going to mean some immigration enforcement. But other than that, I think the federal and state levels are very similar. We need to make our neighborhoods safe. We need to make sure that our schools are serving kids with a good education. And we need some kind of budget and tax reform. Those 3 points are our big points in Washington. And I think they are the big points that we'll be making here at the national level, too.
Yeah, and I know I want to remind people it's kind of loud where you are, so hopefully you can hear this question okay. But, you mentioned Nikki Haley being invited here at the last minute after the assassination attempt to speak. Trump came out in an interview and said he has rewritten his speech to focus on unity as a party. You and I both know that there has also been some disunity in the Republican ranks in Washington. Do you believe what happened to the former president will help heal some of the divides within the party here as well?
I think trouble can be unifying. And I think that there will be, in the end, this will bring us together. I believe that in my bones, Brandi. It'll bring us together nationally. And I think it will bring us together at the state level, too. And clearly, it's one of my jobs to make sure that happens in Washington.
Yeah. I want to end with this, and we'll let you get into the convention there. You represent in the state legislature the area that includes the city of Aberdeen. The mayor has came out and posted on social media, suggested that what happened to former President Donald Trump was arranged by the former president. He has doubled down on that. What is your reaction to that? And what would your message be to the mayor of Aberdeen today?
He needs to take some time away from social media and think deep thoughts about how foolish what he posted was. He's not a sophisticated man. He's new to politics. He is an artist by trade. I think he leads with his heart, not with his head. But I don't think he understands how much what he said hurts people and hurts his own credibility as a mayor. So I think he needs to regroup. I think he needs to apologize. And depending how he handles it in the next few days or week or so, he may need to rethink his involvement in politics.
All right, Jim Walsh. Well, please try to enjoy yourself this week. I think it's going to be a powerful week, certainly the first time that Donald Trump comes out on stage, and we'll keep in touch, okay?
Oh, we will. And sorry about the rough start here, but we're always rolling with the punches in real time.
It's breaking news.
Good to talk to you, Brandi.
So thank you. That Jim Walsh, the chair of the Washington State Republican Party, from outside the Republican National Convention this morning. Again, reminder, we taped that interview about an hour before showtime, and so we had not gotten the official VP pick from former President Donald Trump. We now have that. He posted on Truth Social just a short time ago that it is the junior senator from Ohio, J.D. Vance. He wrote, after lengthy deliberation and thought, and considering the tremendous talents of many others, I have decided that the person best suited to assume the position of Vice President of the United States is Senator J.D. Vance of the great state of Ohio. Ohio also being a very important state in the presidential election, so maybe that had something to do with it. J.D. honorably served our country in the Marine Corps, graduated from Ohio State University in 2 years, and is a Yale Law School graduate, where he was editor of the Yale Law Journal and president of the Yale Law Veterans Association. J.D.'s book, Hillbilly Elegy, became a major, I love Trump, he's pimping his book and stuff, became a major bestseller and movie as it championed the hardworking men and women of our country. JD has had a very successful business career in technology and finance, and now during the campaign will be strongly focused on the people he fought so brilliantly for, the American workers and farmers in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Minnesota, and far beyond. As vice president, JD will continue to fight for our Constitution, stand with our troops, and will do everything he can to help make America great again. He offers him congratulations. And look, as I said, I do think there are some things that JD Vance brings to the table. It's interesting, though. He used to not particularly like Donald Trump and sort of has since come around. So maybe that's what's appealing, that you can't attack him on that because he has been critical of Donald Trump in the past. It is also fascinating to me. I was just telling Nicole that, Kamala Harris, she skyrocketed from, being the AG in California, a first-term United States senator, being elevated to the position of the vice presidency. And for J.D. Vance, it's very similar. This is a very similar, very quick rise for him if he's elected vice president on the ticket with Donald Trump. He's only been serving as the junior senator from Ohio since 2023. So it's like shows up in Congress, and before he knows it, he's on what is probably going to be, let's be honest, the winning ticket to be the next vice president of the United States. And so certainly I'm sure people are looking forward to hearing what he has to say at the RNC. So moving on, again, we're having a commercial-free episode today. I just thought it would be a little bit tacky to talk about an attempted assassination of a former president, and also fit in some advertisements in there. So we're going straight through today. I mentioned at the end of that interview there with Jim Walsh, who's a state rep in addition to his position as the state Republican Party chair, and he represents Aberdeen. Whenever something like this happens, like what happened to Trump over the weekend, there's always unhinged responses, right? You expect it from the depths of the internet, from a few misguided politicians, and the mayor of Aberdeen is no exception. So his name is Douglas Orr. This is what he originally put out on social media over the weekend. He said, and I am also shocked by the amount of misspellings and grammatical errors, but try to set that aside for just a moment. Sick how politics have devolved. Ears bleed a lot. I hope they checked to make sure it wasn't just a self-inflicted scratch. The shooter is dead, so we will never know if it was staged. Not buying it quite yet. Any way you look at it, it was a horrific act. Short of Biden dying, this is about the only thing that could happen that would artificially gain Trump sympathy votes. I hope I'm wrong, but because of his record of deceit, that's the first thing that came to my mind. So here you have the mayor of Aberdeen in Washington essentially saying that this was staged to help get Trump sympathy votes, which is, of course, a horrifying thing to say, considering you have an innocent man who was in the stands dead, who died trying to shield his wife and daughter from the gunshots. You have two other people who were critically injured. So it's just asinine to suggest that this was, and how would you stage that? Like, hey, I want you to be such a good shot that you just nick me in the ear and you don't miss by just an inch and kill me dead on stage. So it's just stupid in a variety of fronts. I think what's even more unbelievable is that he's doubling down on it. He just won't back away from this thought that this is something that Donald Trump staged. Our friend Jason Rance over at 770 KTTH actually got an opportunity to speak with the mayor of Aberdeen. He posted some quotes from that conversation where Jason asked him, like, hey, are you still thinking that this was staged? He said, I respectfully have the right to say what my gut was feeling. I don't believe that people have the right to intimidate me or disrespect me for my respectful comment. Okay, it wasn't a respectful comment. And yes, you do have the right to say what you want to say, but you're a mayor, and so people have a right to criticize what you say. Says Orr spoke with the Jason Rance show over the phone for 20 minutes on Sunday afternoon. He said he questioned the official story of a failed assassination attempt because through my life growing up, I've watched world wrestling. Quote, half the world thinks that they're really wrestlers, and sure, they're athletic and all of that. What is this? But they get paid money for cutting themselves on the forehead or the ear or the top of the head, areas that bleed a lot with very little damage. Or wasn't just relying on his childhood watching fake wrestling. What is this, Nicole? He said, they're acting like it's a bad thing that I would even think such a thing. I only thought that because of the history of Trump lying and grandstanding and not being very honest. He also said when he saw the video of Trump grabbing his ear after being shot, it didn't look genuine. Quote, the whole way he did it just made it seem like it wasn't exactly real. Okay, yeah, can we skip past that? I didn't realize, I don't think that he's all there. That's unfortunate. That's unfortunate for the people of Aberdeen. I mean, that's a really...
Well, what did Walsh call him?
Well, as Jim said, yeah, we won't get into personal attacks, but as Jim said, like, maybe he should reconsider his career in politics. I think after what he said and his description of what he meant, I also agree that it's probably a good idea for him to reconsider whether political public life is something for him. So I want to move on to some other comments that came up that illustrate a broader point that I want to make about this whole Trump thing and political violence and all of that. You know, I am not saying that Jay Inslee or Bob Ferguson or Joe Biden or other Democrats shouldn't come out and condemn what happened to Donald Trump. I think that they should. I'm glad that they did. That doesn't mean that it absolves them of anything that they've said in the past. And one of the only ways for those words to really mean something is consistency. Is consistently, without pause or reflection, calling out acts of political violence when they happen, particularly when they happen in the state that you're responsible for, right? And that's when it just rings hollow, is when you have someone like Jay Inslee, who has ignored so many acts of political violence that have been perpetrated by the left in Seattle and across Washington state. And it's like, those are all fine. And then you just want to pick and choose. Here you are railing against January 6th for 3 years, yet you didn't say anything about what was happening in 2020 on the streets of Seattle in the state that you're the governor for. And the same thing for Bob Ferguson. I mean, in the last few months, look how much Bob Ferguson has punted on the political violence and extremism on the left when it comes to anti-Semitism. And as I've pointed out many times before, Bob Ferguson, didn't say anything about CHOP. He didn't say anything about the riots that were happening in 2020. And now he wants to be taken seriously when he says, oh, we can't have political violence in this country. It's like, well, you haven't been morally consistent. Now, I'm not perfect, but I like to think that this is an area where I have been very morally consistent. I spoke out forcefully about January 6th. I spoke out forcefully on this show about what happened to Nancy Pelosi's husband, about what happened to Steve Scalise on the Republican side. And Lord knows I have spoken out time and time again when there have been acts of politically motivated violence on the streets of Seattle. I have been the subject of politically motivated acts of violence on the streets of Seattle. And because of that experience, over many years being attacked by Antifa, my crew being mobbed at CHOP, the political violence we found ourselves at the center of in downtown Seattle in the summer of 2020, I think it's because of that experience that I have been morally consistent on that issue. Whether you're Democrats or Republicans, you lose the right to rant and rave about political violence on the other side when you ignore it when it happens on your side. And so there were a couple tweets that happened over the weekend that really kind of reinvigorated this frustration that I have about selective outrage over acts of political violence. So there is, if you're not familiar, there is a alternative newspaper in Seattle called The Stranger. And The Stranger doesn't hide what it is. I mean, it's left-wing propaganda. And that's fine. As long as you own it. I'm an opinion show. That's what I do all day long for a job, is I give my opinion. I have no issue with The Stranger taking a progressive, borderline socialist opinion on things, as long as they recognize that that's what they're doing. However, The Stranger also wants to be taken seriously when it, condemns Donald Trump and says Donald Trump is a threat to democracy and talks about January 6th, as an act of political violence in this country. Yet two reporters at The Stranger seemingly condoned and encouraged the attempt on Donald Trump's life. So let's start with Hannah Krieg. So she was immediately criticizing. Mayor Bruce Harrell in Seattle comes out, and he again offers a platitude. He says, "This act of political violence is disturbing and unacceptable in our country. Thank you to the Secret Service, So Hannah Krieg, reporter at The Stranger, immediately criticizes the mayor of Seattle for daring to say that trying to assassinate a former president is wrong. She wrote, Mayor Bruce Harrell swiftly comes to the defense of Trump, a failed insurrectionist touted by mainstream Democrats as an existential threat to our democracy. Almost like, how dare he defend Trump, who just got shot in the head. So she swiftly got criticism for that, and she locked down her Twitter account. But that wasn't even the worst thing said by a reporter at The Stranger over the weekend. A reporter named Ashley Nurbovig with The Stranger thought fit to tweet this: "Make America aim again." Can you imagine being a journalist, even an opinion journalist in Seattle, and a former president comes within an inch of death and you say, "Make America aim again"? Well, that has gone pretty viral. Libs of TikTok shared it. Some other big accounts shared it. And she has deleted her entire social media presence. I mean, if you go to her Twitter account right now, it's not even there. And in response to both of those things, so after that happened, after it started gaining traction across the country, that here you have these two reporters for an alt-left newspaper in Seattle who basically think it's okay to try to assassinate Donald Trump. Here's what really gets me. The Stranger tweeted this out on their main page. The Stranger condemns political violence in the strongest possible terms, period. The Stranger condemns political violence in the strongest possible terms, period. No, you don't. You never have. The Stranger has not condemned violence on the left when it's against police officers, when it's against reporters they don't like me. They have been perfectly fine with political violence from pro-Palestine people. They have never condemned the years and years and years of political violence from the left in Seattle. They just don't. They encourage it, in fact. In the summer of 2020, when it was police who were being attacked, it was the fault of officers. But now, because two of their reporters said something that's getting national attention, they say the Stranger condemns political violence in the strongest possible terms. So today I reached out to the Stranger and the Stranger's editor, Rich Smith, and I said, hey, I haven't got a response back yet. I don't know if I will, because I know Rich Smith, and I'll talk about our history coming up in a moment. But I said, do these two reporters still work there, right? And also, can you give me one example of the Stranger saying anything about political violence carried out by the left? Because I haven't seen it. If there is one, I haven't seen it. And what I think is interesting is, again, Rich Smith is the editor of The Stranger. So these two reporters work for Rich Smith. And then you have The Stranger putting out on its main page, "We condemn acts of political violence in all forms, period." What's really interesting is I immediately went back to my crew being mobbed at CHOP up on Capitol Hill, being mobbed for a half hour, being forced to seek refuge in a fire station. And I immediately remembered that not only did reporters from The Stranger find it very funny, but Rich Smith himself, who again is now the head of The Stranger, he fanned the flames of the attacks on me and my crew. 3 days after my crew was mobbed at CHOP, Rich Smith saw fit to put out a photo that some local photographer had taken of me during a riot, where behind me, unbeknownst to me, the police were on their bicycles trying to get around me, and I was doing a Facebook Live on my phone. Kind of looks badass, honestly. But Rich Smith pushed this photo out. That's all he did. There was no tweet accompanying it. It was just a picture of me surrounded by police officers. 3 days after my crew was attacked at an anti-police rally. And not only did Rich Smith put it out, but the stranger retweeted it. Now, what do you think the intent of that was? What would be the intent of, during violent protests against the police, where I had just been attacked, what do you think the intent of Rich Smith and the stranger was of putting out a photo of me surrounded by police officers? There's only one thing that they were intending, was to make me a target, to say Brandi's in bed with the police. So if you see her at another one of these protests, have at it. And that's what I said at the time. That's why I told Rich Smith, the only reason that you're doing this is you're trying to make me more of a target. And so now you fast forward a few years and because they got, some really unfortunate national attention for things their reporter said, they want to say, we condemn political violence in the strongest possible terms. No, you've encouraged political violence in the strongest possible terms. You've covered for people who are perpetrating political violence. You have tried to create a situation where there would be even more politically motivated violence against me personally. So I know it's bullshit that you condemn political violence in the strongest possible terms. So I look forward to seeing how the stranger responds to all of this. Do I want these two reporters fired? I don't care. I don't care what happens to them. The stranger is what the stranger has always been. It doesn't surprise me one bit that you have two reporters from the stranger who are suggesting that they don't care whether Donald Trump is assassinated. That's what the stranger is. I think what continues to shock me is that you have some politicians who actually think that the stranger, what they do is journalism, or what the stranger does or says matters. I've long said I think Seattle and Washington State would be much better off if the stranger folds. If the stranger, look, I'm all for differences of opinion, but if the stranger ceased to exist as a news publication, Seattle and Washington State would be much better off. Because they are the ones who are propping up the craziest ideas, the most fringe ideas. They are the ones who defend the politicians on the far, far left who are coming up with the kookiest ideas. And if they didn't have that platform, I honestly think that that would be one less extremist opinion in the mix. And I think Seattle would be in a better place today, frankly, without the stranger. But do I want two people to lose their jobs because they said something that it doesn't surprise me that they said? I don't care. In fact, Ashley's the one who tweeted out, "Make America Aim Again." I should send her an email. It was interesting. Ashley had reported something about our friend Jonathan Cho, I think it was. And Jonathan Cho pointed out that she'd been arrested for burglary, like in her old job in Montana. She used to be a TV reporter in Montana. And I dug into that a little more and I found out that she was arrested, never prosecuted, because she tried to steal her dog back from an ex-boyfriend. Mm-hmm. And I came to her defense on Twitter because I was like, listen, I would do much worse to get my dog back from an ex-boyfriend. Yes. So I was like, I don't think it's fair to go after this girl. Like, there's a lot of reasons to attack the stranger, but because she tried to get her dog back, I would do a lot more than break into someone's home to get my dog back. So she sent me a nice email, actually, and she said, hey, I know we don't agree on a lot, but I appreciate you coming to my defense. You made a difficult day on social media a little easier. I'm not going to come to her defense on this one. I mean, she said, make America aim again, and doesn't care that Donald Trump got shot in the head. So she's on her own on this one. But whether she loses her job or not, I'm not going to sit here and lose sleep over that. It's not like the stranger would replace them with someone who was less, far left. I mean, they would just bring in another person who would be the exact same type of journalist and contributor to discourse that these two are. So that doesn't matter at all to me. All right. I mentioned a little bit different of a show today because we're focusing, of course, on the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. However, there is one thing happening starting tomorrow that we had an interview scheduled for today, and I really wanted to talk about it a little bit. So Dr. Raul Garcia, who is running for United States Senate in Washington State against Senator Maria Cantwell, he is going to be, he's getting his steps in the next few days. So from tomorrow, July 16th to Sunday, July 21st, he is going to be holding something called the Freedom from Fentanyl Walk, where he and supporters are going to be walking from central Washington to Seattle. I wonder if they know how hot out it's going to be this week. But the whole idea behind it is to raise awareness and bring people together, frankly, which couldn't we use that right now, to really bring awareness to the fentanyl crisis, to how deadly it is, and to try to come together with some meaningful solutions. And so Dr. Raul Garcia was nice enough to come on and talk about this event that they're holding starting tomorrow. Dr. Raul Garcia, welcome to Undivided.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, let me just, we have you on to talk about something that you've got going on starting tomorrow, but obviously, the big news about the attempted assassination on the former president. What were you thinking when you saw it?
Well, I think it's a pretty sad moment in our country that our division has gotten this far, right? And I think it's time to step back and say, this is enough. This is the limit. This has to be the outlier. We have to come back and remember that we're Americans. I mean, I came to this country from Cuba, and I never got here thinking, oh, we have to divide between Democrats and Republicans or our ideology or anything else, to the point that we hate each other so much that we actually try to assassinate one of the candidates, and in this case, President Trump. So our thoughts and prayers were immediately to him and his family, and of course the hero that died, that was just attending a political rally that should never happen in America, and protecting his family, as we all feel very viscerally that family first, and unfortunately lost his life. But we're very grateful that President Trump is well. We still, our thoughts and prayers are still with his family to get over this disgusting event, and for our country to take this event and say, you know what, we're going to make this the catalyst to unite again, to remember that we're Americans, to remember that we can talk about issues, that we could be worthy opponents in a political race, that we don't have to hate each other, that we could come to the table and find solutions with different ideologies. And I am going to push every day for that. I've been pushing up to now. Now I'm going to push even further for that.
Yeah, and on the show so far today, this is really a theme that we've been diving into. Sometimes there are these platitudes after an event like this where, oh, there's no place for political violence. And those platitudes come from people who, have been doing things and saying things that I think can encourage political violence. And so I do want to give you credit. I have never seen you, back when you're running for governor or now turn nasty. Unless I missed it, I've just never seen you behave that way. I've never seen you be the kind of political candidate who leads with vitriol and division. And so I think that you're a good example of what candidates can be. And so, certainly in today's climate, thank you for being like that and for setting that example. Let's talk about the event that speaking of, putting the hate aside and focusing on the issues. So you are going to be doing a walk. Can you call it a walk? Because it's quite the journey to raise awareness for fentanyl. So talk about the concept behind this.
Well, I wanted to come up with something powerful that united Eastern and Western Washington. And I have been saying all along in our campaign that we want a government of solutions. Let's talk about the issues. As we just talked about, let's end division. Let's talk about things that will make our lives better. And if you step out of our doorstep in this state, no matter where you are, you're going to find fentanyl in our streets. Here in the emergency department, I see 2 to 5 overdoses every shift. And it is something that I've been seeing throughout the years getting worse and worse and worse. And we need to bring about a solution that has teeth. So what I have recommended is the Americans Against Fentanyl Act as your next United States Senator that I will push as my first bill, which will give manslaughter charges to fentanyl dealers and mandatory rehab to addicts. And this involuntary rehab will create a controversy. But as a physician, I could tell you that these individuals, their brain is telling them to lie, cheat, and steal to get that next fix, or they're going to die. So they will lie to their parents, to a judge, to the police officer, to whoever, to get that next fix. And everybody that has succeeded in rehab has always come back and said, thank you. Thank you for taking me out when I couldn't make that decision for myself. As a matter of fact, Jeannie Burton, who is very big in this arena, she is going to join us starting Wednesday. And it's going to walk with me all the way to Sunday into Seattle. So this walk is to raise awareness on an issue that is killing our children, our family members. You know, Jess and I almost lost our oldest to fentanyl, and our neighbors. And we want people along the way to join the walk, to tell us your stories. You just want to come and talk to me, that's fine. Fentanylwalk.com has our schedule from tomorrow all the way to Sunday, when we feel will be historical, to end the walk at 2 p.m., walking the I-90 bridge from Mercer Island into Seattle. We will want to have as many people there as possible to have our voice be heard about this horrible killer.
Well, you make especially today, I think the point is well taken that this should be a uniting issue. Whether it's people on the streets of downtown Seattle or over where you are in Eastern Washington or Central Washington, Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter. It doesn't discriminate. And so, it's an issue tearing our communities apart, but dealing with it is certainly an opportunity to unite. Any Democrats planning in that regard to join you on the walk, you think?
Oh, I think so. I think plenty of Democrats are joining me on the walk. Laura Lynch being probably one of the most significant. She lost her daughter to fentanyl. She will probably speak in Seattle with me. She's been a big proponent of our campaign and has been a lifelong Democrat, but lost her daughter. She went upstairs to her room and her daughter was dead. Wow. Right before that, the daughter had come into an ER, and the ER let her go home. I mean, these are things that we need to change. We need to give the power of healthcare back to patients and physicians instead of insurance companies. But that's another topic. We're excited about this walk. We of course did a pre-walk last week from Toppenish to the starting gate tomorrow. Those first 20 miles, Brandi, I can tell you weren't that easy under 109-degree weather last week, but we did it. And to highlight how big of a problem we have here in Yakima County. And another thing that I say and I mean, let every step of this walk honor every senseless death that we've had in this state from fentanyl. People that will never be 24, that will never be 35, that will never be any age, that and will never be who they wanted to be because they died, be it one pill that they took by accident and they died, or they were addicted to this horrible killer. We have to change that, and we have to bring about better solutions than we have had up to now, spending $430 billion on things that have just enabled this problem to get bigger.
Yeah, and you fix this, you solve this, you solve for a lot of the crime issues, you solve for the homeless crisis that we have. I talked to, I can't remember which one it was, one of our local sheriffs, and I asked, how much of the crime you're dealing with is directly associated to the drug crisis? He's like, 98%. I mean, so if you can deal with it, think of how much money we can save, and heartache and crime and all of that stuff. I will say, you had mentioned you did your pre-walk and it was really hot out. I saw videos that I think your wife took, and you looked like you were having a good time. So you were suffering through it, but you were having a good time. And so I know you're a doctor and you know this, but sunscreen, okay. Keep the hat on. You guys be safe out there. Lots of water and things. I don't want anybody passing out on the fentanyl walk. One more time with the website, Dr. Garcia, for folks who want to join in.
Fentanylwalk.com, fentanylwalk.com. We're going to have a gathering every evening in the towns that we get to. So if you want to gather there, if you don't want to walk, if you would just want to gather for our dinner, you could do that. But definitely Sunday the 21st, please be a part of our historical walk across the Mercer Island I-90 bridge into Seattle at 2 p.m. So we're going to meet at 12:45 at the Lid in Mercer Island on Sunday the 21st. And we want a big crowd to make our voices heard.
Great. Dr. Raul Garcia, candidate for United States Senate. We appreciate you joining us, and we'll be following your walk along the way.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brandi. Have a great day.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to get people talking about the issue. And as long as we're on the subject of bringing people together, there are so many issues that we're facing in our state that should be bipartisan, everyone, hands on deck. Let's get to the bottom of it. Fentanyl and the drug crisis absolutely should be one of them. Yet here we've got, politicians saying, oh, the homeless crisis isn't a drug crisis. It's a lack of affordable housing. I mean, come on. We should be able to get reasonable people from both sides to come together and say this drug crisis has gone too far. We all agree on, the core, the basics of what need to be done. Get people help. Force them into help if you need it. So we'll be paying attention to that fentanyl walk as it proceeds. All right, as we move right along in our no commercial episode of Undivided, it feels a little weird. We'll get into questions and comments. Boo Boo Bear with a $10 super chat and just some applause hands. Thank you. Sergeant Pickles with a $4.99 super chat. Afternoon, I was on my way to vacation, ended up on the same ferry as Jessamine and told her congrats in person. Ferry debacle was another thing, though. So we had mentioned, hello, Nicole. We mentioned that we were gone on Thursday because our friend Jessamine was getting married, and Sergeant Pickles emailed me and he said, FYI, I'm on a ferry to Friday Harbor, and it's a nightmare. So we're going to talk about this on the show tomorrow because we waited, how long total? So, I mean, our ferry was 3.5 hours late, but we were there for 5.5 hours because we got there just before 10. We didn't leave till 3:30. Like, one of 3 ferries to Friday Harbor was actually running and operational, and it was wild. So Sergeant Pickles was also on the back and forth, and got to say congratulations to Jessamine in person.
Yeah.
I love that. Oh, she probably loved that.
She told me about that.
Yeah,
but
that's
very
great.
Cool. It was a long day. I got sunburn on one arm and not the other arm. Like, it was a wild day, but everything went smooth the rest of the trip.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Linda Marsh with some criticism for me. Shame on you. Republicans have been spewing hate for years and making fun of people when they've gotten hurt, including and especially Trump. And you've said nothing. That's not true. I have. You've just proven yourself a hypocrite like the rest. I'm so disappointed in you. I don't condone violence, but it's never good to say I don't condone violence, but the Republicans and Trump have been condoning and telling people to use violence for way too long. I don't know what you're talking about with the use violence thing. All of a sudden it happens to them and it's Democrats who did it. No, you did it to yourselves. So, Linda, that's just all ridiculous, frankly. That's not true. I haven't been a Trump supporter until like a month ago. And I really don't even support Donald Trump. I support pushing back against the machine that's been trying to hold Donald Trump down. And I certainly support Donald Trump over Joe Biden. And I support a lot of Donald Trump's policies. I support someone who's going to be hard at the southern border. I support someone who wants energy independence. I support someone who can make sure that we have a more forceful position on the global stage so we don't have some of these huge, expensive, deadly, costly conflicts going on. But that's just not true that I have not spoken out about Republican violence. Every time when it came up when I was in mainstream news where Trump supporters were attacking journalists, which happened multiple times, I spoke out about it forcefully. There's video evidence of it. Everything I do and say is on video and on the record. So that's just not true at all. And as I said, I have been very morally consistent on the political violence issue. That's the only way that you can have and have your position be taken seriously is when you speak out. What do I always say? Actions before affiliation. Actions before affiliation. When you speak out based on the actions and without care or concern for the affiliation. So I'm not going to let you try to paint me as not being morally consistent on that because I know I've been morally consistent on it. So Linda, you're just wrong. Jeff Schaefer, Joe Biden said a week ago that Trump needs to be put in the bullseye, then an assassination attempt happens. If Trump had said the same thing about Joe, then someone tried to kill Joe, Trump would have been persecuted. I'm so tired of biased media. 100%. And again, I am not willing to connect, to put a direct line from what Joe Biden has said to Donald Trump. I don't know what was going on in the mind of that 20-year-old. Maybe he just thought, oh, someone important's coming to town today. I hate my life and I want people to talk about me, so I'm just going to try to kill him. No idea. But that doesn't mean that it can't ignite a conversation about genuinely understanding and caring when you're in a position of power, how your words can affect people who are mentally unhinged. Let's see. Sheila, funny, no violence is okay, yet every Democratic state allowed the violent protesting to go without a word. Right, which is the point that I'm making here, which is you can't say no political violence is okay and then like Jay Inslee say, chop? I've never heard of it. That just doesn't compute. And there's much more recent examples. Bob Ferguson has yet to forcefully condemn some of the anti-Semitism that was happening recently. I released a list last week of 15 questions the media must ask Bob Ferguson before the ballots go out. And one of them was, why did you never speak out about the violence in 2020? You're the state's chief law enforcer. You never said anything about CHOP or the riots in downtown Seattle. So that's why I don't take him seriously on this. Matt Gilbert with a $10 super chat. Everything I'm saying is getting blocked on super chat. So all I have to say is thank you. Were you putting curse words in, Matt? Were there swear words in your super chat? No, we appreciate you though. Captain Cranky Pants. So the question is, how do we hold the media accountable while at the same time hold to the First Amendment? I mean, outlets like CNN and some of these news stations. Did you see was it the Denver Post headline that said like shooter dies in like attack on Trump? It's like, that's your headline? It was like had to do with the shooter die. I was like, oh my God, so bad.
Of course
you pick and choose. Like they can still have their First Amendment rights. CNN can be on the air. Doesn't mean you have to watch them. I always said, hit them in the pocketbook. If you think someone is not doing a good job in the media, then you don't support them. If you don't think I'm doing a good job, you don't subscribe to the show. You don't watch, you don't listen, you don't give them the clicks, you don't give them the ratings, all of those things. Let's just use MSNBC as an example. Clicking on an MSNBC article is supporting them. Clicks, traffic to their website, drives advertising revenue. Following them on social media drives, you're adding to their list of followers. It's giving them more ability to get advertising revenue. So all of that. So you just have to not support passively or actively people in the media who you don't think are doing a good job. And it will have an impact on them eventually. Mary Christie, JD is only 39, very capable of being president someday. Yeah, it's interesting because that is, and I guess we haven't talked about this, that is kind of saying that's who I want to be the heir apparent, right? Which is kind of odd because don't you think like DeSantis would be the heir apparent?
I don't think so. I think he's kind of, he's a Chris Christie now because Chris Christie was I think he would have had a great shot had he not been running against Obama for the second term.
Yeah.
At that time, everyone loved him.
Yeah.
And then they were like, well, we'll just set him off to the side for a little bit. And then it went like, people just went crazy on him and he wouldn't have a chance. Like he didn't have a chance when he did run. And I think that that's the same situation with DeSantis is now they have so long to attack him and it's worked. Yeah. Right. So, and Trump has even attacked him. And so now
he's backed off of it.
He's backed off. But I mean, that all adds up to the past. Right.
Yeah.
So far, JD has not been attacked by Trump. He doesn't have people don't have as long to attack him before he could run in 4 years.
It's just so interesting, this zero to hero thing where it's like, you don't even have to be in Congress for very long. I mean, like I said, Kamala Harris was on her first term as a senator and she still very well could be the first female president of the United States by virtue of like a de facto president.
Right.
So it's just kind of crazy.
It is. But yeah, I think that this is probably a better shot than DeSantis. And I really like DeSantis.
Yeah. Well, I guess Trump wasn't anything in the political realm before he was president of the United States. So that was zero to hero. Rachel Murphy, Brandi, thank you for being such a profound voice of reason and common sense. I share your sentiments on the events of this election year so far. I'm horribly terrified of what may be coming. Well, I appreciate that, Rachel. Thank you. Heidi Ryan, let's face it. We have a whole generation of 15 to 25-year-olds who are unstable. I agree.
And we're not addressing that.
We don't want to talk about the underlying reasons. We don't want to deal with it in a meaningful way. We don't want to and again, I hate this because I never like to contradict myself. I want parents to be able to parent. I don't want the government to intervene. But it does come down to parents, like take the phones away, get them off the internet. I don't want, so I've got this weird situation I'm in where on the one hand, I don't want over-regulation from the government. It's up to parents whether a kid can use social media and all of these things. But it's like, well, what do you do when you clearly have a whole generation that's been raised through a screen, that's been allowed to grow up with a screen in front of their face and, playing video games and social media, and it's ruining the country.
Bring back flip phones.
Yeah, flip it.
That's it.
Razor phone.
That's all you need.
Remember the one that went like this?
Yep.
What was it called? Does anybody remember where it slid up sideways?
What was that
and it was like,
called?
It was so cool.
Or even just the BlackBerry. So it's just
phones cool again.
Just for your email.
Yeah, for your email, for all of that.
I think that's what the president still has to use because they're not as trackable as all of our smartphones.
Oh, interesting.
So they have to use a BlackBerry still.
I didn't even know BlackBerries existed still.
I think just for the president, maybe.
Someone,
I don't know. I've heard that.
Someone tell me what the flip phone was called, where it didn't go, it went.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I don't remember what it was called.
I remember
Make phones
going to
cool
college.
Again, at least.
My phone is this big. I had like the coolest phone because it was so little.
Oh, it was
Remember
like tiny. Yeah, it's just interesting. It didn't do all the things the phone does now, but maybe that's a good thing.
But that's what kids need is simplicity, but safety. So you have it for safety. You don't need all this.
Yeah.
crap.
E said, last I checked, Mercer Island is not Central Washington. Who called it Central Washington?
Well, so I wanted to clarify, put that in there so we could clarify. So what Raul was saying was that he wants you to, he's walking from Central Washington to Seattle.
Yeah.
He's asking people to join him for the last the last little portion, which starts at Mercer Island, and walk across the bridge.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So clarity there. Yeah. Mercer Island. Well, I always think it's funny what they call Eastern Washington, because it's like you get past the Cascades, they're like, that's Eastern Washington. I'm like, is it though? You get the whole peninsula.
Central.
So if you look at it, it's not. But the Seattleites, they're like Eastern Washington.
Well, I think maybe that's Central that would rather be lumped in with Eastern than Western.
Yeah, that's true. All right, good comments per the usual. Going a little over today, but that was anticipated. I do want to, we threw everything else out the window today, but I do want to get to our closing sanity check. So there were, a lot of comments, obviously, about what happened to former President Donald Trump. Some were completely meaningless. Others were better, but not great. I genuinely thought, talking about bridging political divides, someone who had the best, most meaningful remarks after the shooting was the governor of Pennsylvania, a Democrat, Governor Josh Shapiro, who gave a really meaningful statement about the man who was killed, Corey Comparatore, and him being killed protecting his family. Something that, again, going back to what Melania Trump said, talked about the humanity of those who were involved first and foremost. And then he made what I thought was a very convincing and meaningful call for unity.
Political disagreements can never, ever be addressed through violence. Disagreements are okay, but we need to use a peaceful political process to settle those differences. This is a moment where all leaders have a responsibility to speak and act with moral clarity, where all leaders need to take down the temperature and rise above the hateful rhetoric that exists and search for a better, brighter future for this nation. It's the work that I try to do every day here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and that's the work that falls to each and every American right now.
Yeah, so that Governor Josh Shapiro, the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania, giving what I thought was a very heartfelt, meaningful, believable statement to the people of his state and of this country about the way to move forward from here. That has been today's episode of Undivided. Thank you all for being here. We'll get back to our normal episodes tomorrow with all our bells and whistles. We've got a lot to discuss. Of course, we'll be tracking what's happening at the RNC and the investigation into the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. We appreciate every single one of you for your commitment, not just today, but every day, to bridging political divides by restoring common sense and sanity to our political discourse. I've said it a million times. There can be no common sense without sanity. Sanity must come first. So thank you all so much for being here. If you want to support the show, you can do it for $5 a month at undividedpod.com. That's undividedpod.com.